talking about the subject of recovery for this sexual abuser. And probably of all the counseling that you might ever do, this would be the most difficult and the hardest case to take on. Especially if the sexual abuser we're talking about here is what we call a fixated pedophile. Earlier in our class we talked about the different levels, but generally you have regressed, which is a person that through life relates to age mates normally, that and maybe they had a chance, and somebody under this age, they had a chance to be sexual with them and they chose to do that. But that isn't their overall pattern. The real problem, and the biggest problem we have in this area, is that of the fixated pedophile. And the fixated pedophile is that one that either was abused themselves earlier in life, or had some trauma or something in a particular area, and for some reason they relate to a particular age group. That's why it's called fixated. Many times it's the age group in which they were abused at, or it's the age group at which something went wrong in their life. They've never developed beyond that. Now part of that usually is that they don't feel confident dealing with adults, and they can feel confident dealing with kids at that level and sort of be accepted. But generally that's the type that is the most difficult to deal with. Of course we have a third type that we'll just generally deal with here, and that is the sexual addict. The sexual addict is struggling with problems like masturbation, pornography, fantasy, and those things in their lives, and they will act out to meet their needs, to medicate their own emotions. You see what's going on there? So we have different levels here of problem that we're dealing with and that we're struggling with. Now here are some of the characteristics of the offender. And depending which category we're talking about, most of the stuff I'm going to be focusing on is the fixated pedophile, okay? First, they seldom tell the truth. There is no one that denies more, is in denial more, that will lie to you more, and you'll never pick it up than that fixated pedophile and sexual abusers. Why do you think that's true? Because of the shame level. See, think about this. In our society, can you think of any other category of person, including murderers, and after you get out of jail for what you did, you have to register and that your location is published on the internet, and you have to do it for the rest of your life? How shameful is that? They minimize, they deny, they lie. They seldom express remorse or wrongdoing, except to manipulate, to get out of something, to get out of problems and so on. They might admit things again if they have to, and that's why programs are set up like they are. They're most concerned about the consequences of being caught. They usually try to mobilize a ministry to support them as a character witness. So don't be surprised if you get someone in your church that gets arrested if they want you to go to the stand and tell them what good and wonderful person they are. But what all do you also know? You've got a wonderful facade, and you probably haven't picked it up at all. You don't even know much about their character at all because it's so buried. They usually repeat unless they're stopped. The legal system provides the best means for getting them into treatment and keeping them in treatment. The message must be that the behavior is wrong, it must stop, and that help is available. They're looking for a quick fix. They become passive dependent on the counselor. They're usually dominant or passive aggressive. They deny the offenses. They fail to meet appointments. They actively sabotage your counseling. And they may abandon their family. So to gain a picture of how much fun this is, counseling in these particular areas. One of the things that we will say, and you'll see later on, is that you have to have some method to validate the truth. Internal characteristics. What are these people like inside as you get to know them? Fantasy and submission are more prevalent than assertiveness. They're living in this fantasy world. Of course, it's their fantasies. They're fantasizing about their sexual exploits, about that these other people like them and love them and so on, and really want to do this. In fact, a lot of pedophiles will tell you, oh, it wasn't my fault, it's the aggressive kids. They wanted it, they were sexually came on to me. Come on now. They feel alone or isolated. They're usually loners. Underlying moodiness of emptiness, fearfulness, and depression. They avoid adult relationships due to the fear of rejection or failure. They substitute fantasy for reality. They substitute children for adults to complement their own immaturity. As I said, they're already fixated, many times stuck at a particular age. Emotionally over-invested in the victims. They almost feel that the victims belong to them. They treat the victim as a peer. They try to mobilize the victim's time and restrict the victim's outside activities. They have a sense of entitlement or ownership. They project their own needs and desires on the victim. That's why they say, see, the victim wanted this. That's all part of what we're talking about here. They're preoccupied with sexual fantasies about the victim. One of the things that we'll do in a way of analysis we'll be talking about here is we'll analyze their fantasies. And from those fantasies, you can figure out what's really the needs are they're trying to meet in themselves through this other person. Develops a sense of pleasure, comfort, and power in the relationship. Much like an addictive personality. What are we saying? This thing isn't all about just a sexual contact here of meeting my needs of a drug like it would be of a normal sexual addict. You see what I'm saying? There's a whole lot more going on here. This person's needing most of their needs through this whole fantasy, relating to a child, this whole lifestyle. And it's their deep inside emptiness that they're filling. They're filling their whole life through this relationship. To them, it's a real relationship, but they're more in a fantasy world, making it into that, and that's how they're functioning in life instead of functioning normally. In the family, they're usually isolated. They have unsatisfactory married sex. They have marital discord. Role reversal. I mean, many times in the family, one of the kids will be treated like the wife, and the wife will be treated like a kid, especially in the area of incest. Dependent, powerless wife, mentally or physically ill wife, sexually punitive or absent mother, family dysfunction, alcoholism. The problem is the thing gets all turned around and they're still trying to meet their needs. Some members, I believe I gave some of these to you before, but to give you an idea of what we're talking about of the different areas. Again, the first area we talked about is incest, so it's in the family. Most damaging of everything. Then the fixated pedophile we talked about. Premeditated regardless of stress, identifies with the child, little age-mate contact, immature and inadequate personalities, onset begins at teenage. In one particular study, 53 fixated pedophiles were responsible for 25,757 sexual attacks. That's 485 attacks on children per fixated pedophile. Can you imagine that? See, it's not just a one-time thing. This is an entire lifetime. Totally focused on sexual contacts with children. Another one, they had 232, and they admitted to 55,250 attacks. That's 238 per abuser. The deviance and arousal patterns in 42% begins by age 15. And 57% by age 19. So you see, this is something that's coming from family of origin stuff that's happened here, that is then continuing throughout the life, and over, year after year after year, person after person after person. The regressed, again what I said before, primary sexual attraction to age mates, including adequate sexual functioning, situational alcohol-related onset in adulthood. And a very interesting study they've been doing on TV, where they had one particular pedophile who got arrested and was so good in jail he got himself out over and over again on appeals. But they figure he probably was responsible for thousands of abuse, and they can't seem to keep him in jail. They put him back in jail again now. They're very good at manipulating the court system, very good at working around this kind of stuff, avoiding being contact and put away. And of course that's why we have perpetrator laws, where if somebody is caught like 3 times or whatever, but they can prove they didn't recover, that we have to pretty much lock them up and don't let them out at all. What are the functions of this whole thing? To validate their worth or self-esteem, to compensate for feeling neglected or abused by the wife or women, to restore a sense of power. See, they have power over the child. See, there's a lot more going on here. To gratify the need for attention and recognition, affiliation or overcome loneliness, temporarily strengthens a sense of identity, relief from emotional pain, reduces tension or stress. What's the history look like? They usually have been abused themselves. They had an absent or abusive parent, insecurely covered by a rigid personality or defenses, legalism, shallow relationship, authoritarian use of scriptures to control others, misuse or confusion of family love with sex, unable to talk about sex openly, stress reliever due to the fear of intimacy, insecurity, poor communication, inability to handle conflict. Notice this: devout, rigid, moralistic, conservative framework. So where do you think you're going to find some of these people? In the church. What areas do we want to evaluate now? You've got this person sitting before you, and they just messed up in your church or something, they just got arrested or so on, and you're trying to figure out what you're really dealing with here. What are the different areas that we want to ask them about and look for? They suggest you start with a written sexual and family history, and get a hold of all the police reports, victims, counselors' reports, background with the wife, probation report, complete descriptions, a copy of a polygraph or plethograph evaluation. Why do you ask for all that? Because they're going to try to con you. And they're going to be very good, and if you don't have hard evidence to confront them with, are they going to probably snow you? They probably are. They're going to tell you some story and give you some things to watch for. Well, I'm just really struggling with this and so on. And I've never done it. But I was at camp one year and they did it, and this boy did accuse me of that. Past accusations, even if they didn't, be a red flag that wakes you up. Other things to look for. If they come from that real negative family where sex was dirty and bad, or if they've been sexually abused, or early introduction to sex. Meaning that, well, when they were 5, somebody played house with them, you know. Or they saw a Playboy magazine when they were very young. Or they messed around with some other kids in the neighborhood as they were growing up. And particularly if this is pretty traumatic, especially if they were sexually abused, say, orally, by some older person when they were a young kid. That might get your fixated pedophile started right at that particular point. See what I'm saying? There's a lot of things that you're looking for here. Evaluate their sexual fantasies. If you can get them to be honest with you, from those you can figure out how they're meeting their needs and where they're at. Unfortunately, when I didn't realize that, I didn't know that at a point, I was counseling a young man who had a number of these characteristics. And I finally asked him about his sexual fantasies. What do you think they all were? With boys. All of a sudden I had a huge red flag, but unfortunately it was too late at that point. He had already violated and already got it. And shortly after that he got arrested and went to prison. But the idea was, because I didn't look at his sexual fantasies, I didn't recognize the depth. You know, I had a few things that he tended to have friends with a lot of the boys around, you know what I mean? And I was writing that off more to stuff like, well, he just feels a little bit inadequate, you know, and that's why he's relating more to kids, and he just likes kids. He liked them a whole lot more than I realized. Sexual education myths. Any substance abuse. Suicide attempts. The current social situation. Is he a legalist? How does he handle his Christian principles? See, is he trying to white knuckle it? I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to do it? Or does he have a real relationship with God? Current family environment. And the main thing you have to decide here, can you really counsel this person? Is outpatient going to be good enough, or are you just biding time for them to reoffend? Or do they really need to go to an inpatient program? Here's sort of the criteria. Outpatient, in past history, there should be no physical force or threat of harm. If there's any threat of harm, this person needs inpatient. Regressed under stress. Are other stressors present? See, do we have a regressed or do we have a fixated? Fixated, we probably need to get them into some inpatient treatment and so on. Regressed, you might be able to handle yourself. No criminal record or lifestyle. Takes responsibility, repentant, concerned for the victim, remorseful. If they're not remorseful, they're not concerned for the victim, they're blaming the victim, guess what? Watch out. Can they handle life adequately? Do they have other psychological problems? Are there strong support services in the community to help them? Do they have bizarre or ritualistic acts included in the abuse? Is prostitution or pornography involved? Is it increasing? Are they doing more and more and more rather than less and less and less? Are they fixated on a particular age range? Big red flag. Are they more distressed with the consequences than what they actually did? Those are the type of questions you're going to have to sort out to determine if this is something you can even consider treating or whatever. What are your responsibilities as a counselor? First, protect the victim. Second, if this offense is not reported, you need to report it. This is one of those cases where, you know, people say, well, maybe it really wasn't abuse. No, if it's there, you better report this. Because how would you like to feel that you didn't report it so nothing was done and now additional people got hurt? Family, help the family to deal with the immediate consequences of the disclosure. Treatment usually takes at least 2 years with of a structured environment for the family and for the person. Treatment programs. 80% chance that they will do it again if they don't get a significant help. What do these programs look like? And you can set one up yourself. You can get it court approved. We have an offender program here where we work with offenders and try and deal with them. The first characteristic is they're not allowed to reoffend during the program. That's the main goal. You give them the tools to not reoffend after leaving the program. Requires active participation. Requires testing of some sort. Either you do a lie detector test, and let me explain how this is used. Okay? How many of you know that lie detectors are not 100% perfect in what they detect, right? But that's not the way you use it. You use it by saying you can't get in this program unless you pass a perfect lie detector. So you confess to me all the things that you've done so you can pass the lie detector. That's the method that they use to get people to confess and really be honest in the situation. And then during the treatment program, they also do the lie detector again at intervals to make sure the person hasn't offended and isn't reoffending. There's another type of test called a plethysmograph. And that basically is a measure of how turned on the person is. In other words, what they can do is give the person an image, and then they can measure physically how turned on the person gets to that image. Well, what does that tell you? Where the person gets turned on sexually, right? So that's another one that's used a lot in these particular types of programs. Another thing about the program is there is no confidentiality in the program at all, which is different from normal counseling. Why? So you can talk to the victim, so you can tell the victim how things are going, so you can tell the parents how things are going, so you can tell the police how things are going. So there's no confidentiality at all. Everything has to be in the open. Of course, that's also going to help them deal with their shame. Specific restrictions based on the case are required. The normal restriction is what? You can't be around children at all. Our restriction here is if we do this kind of counseling, we either do it at a different location or the person has to be escorted 24/7. Because we have children around it. See, the dumbest thing you could do was be having a support group for pedophiles at a church where you have children. Because what are you doing? You're simply giving them a place to target people, and they probably will reoffend, and then you're probably responsible. Especially if you knew in advance that this person had that problem and you didn't protect other people from them, you're liable. This is the whole area you have to be very careful. One of the areas in implementing in a church of how you do it. And normally we do it at a different location. We still help the people, or if we only have one person with it, and we judge that they're safe, we still require that they be escorted. Any place that they go, even to the bathroom. And we release information to everybody. Start as a candidate only. Denial is broken before acceptance. What they're saying is, you can say you want to be part of our program, but you start as a candidate, and then depending on how well you participate, how honest you are, how well you pass the different tests and other things like that, then we consider whether we're going to accept you into the program or not. We don't just take anybody in the program, because if you're not truly repentant, we can't help you. And then added to that is behavioral, group therapy, family therapy, especially in incest cases. Basically, a lot of other stuff is brought in to deal with the person because they understand the problem. Especially in the fixated pedophile, we have a life problem. We don't just have an addiction. This runs throughout the entire person's life. It affects every aspect of their life. They're trying to meet all their needs through this. And so there's a lot of work that has to be done. Differences in treatment. How well do you think unmotivated clients work? They don't. You need criminal justice intervention. Just like in domestic violence, in this particular case, almost everybody that comes to you is going to come to you either because they have to because they got arrested or because they got kicked out of their house. And that's the motivation they're going to need to initially get started. We would love them to come to us and say, oh, I need this help. I really want to, not usually. Remember, there's so much denial, so much facade, all of those kind of things. See, and the problem to this, it's a real trap because, see, here's the problem. If somebody comes to you and they admit that they have abused their children or some child, by the law, what are you going to have to do? Report it to the courts. And what's going to happen? They're going to go to jail for a long time. It used to be 3 to 5 years was minimum. Now it's a lot longer than that. So they're going to want to be honest with you. Are they going to come to you for counseling? Not that they don't have to. The underlying problem is non-sexual. Just like in rapes. You know what rapes are about? Control and anger. They're not about sexuality. Don't blame on the family dysfunction. There's more to it than that. The need to teach and to cope with life. Groups need to deal with denial, provide support, give hope that they can recover because you've got other people in the group. You think this person could be feeling that maybe they're not going to be able to recover. This is just the way they are. All the time. So what do groups do? You got somebody else that's progressed further in the group and they have been sober, if you want to use that term, or they haven't offended for 5 years. They can help the other people. So that's how we use groups, group therapy a lot in this particular area. In group treatment, you lay out at the beginning, name that they're a sexual offender, the offenses they're capable of repeating, deviant impulses that week, how to handle them, number of times they masturbated and has had associated fantasies, sexual activity, what they want to do that night. What are you doing? You're working just hard to keep them from reoffending. And you do that all as the intake into the particular group. You try to get them to conform to the group. You use the group to try to, all the candidates work here. This is our group. We're working to help each other. Get them to all come together and work. And then you can give them group assignments and that kind of stuff. Interrupt the rituals, because most of these things, when you have a pedophile, might be interesting to you. They go through a set ritual. Maybe they start thinking here. And then they start getting excited. And then they start thinking when they can do it. And then maybe they get some money so they can find a hotel room. And then maybe they start going around looking for possible victims. And then they start trying to be nice to the victim and start building a relationship. And then eventually they abuse, and then they threaten, and then they try to cover up, and then they try to continue the relationship. You see what I'm saying? And you'll find that that same ritual will happen over and over and over again, just with different victims. So you have to interrupt those rituals. Improve self-worth. Help the ability to delay gratification. Deal in recovery from life traumas in the past. Re-education, social development, and divorce recovery if they got divorced. Now what does this all sound like? This is all the different types of counseling you can possibly do, but what do they need? All the different kinds of counseling you can possibly do. You're doing that's why this is so difficult, is because we have a very strong addictive behavior here, but we have a whole person that has all these different areas and all these different things that they need help in. Behavior treatment. A lot of the stuff, especially in the secular world, that's done here is what is the behavior treatment. And I apologize if this gets a bit in the graphic side, but that's what really is done and what is done in the secular area. Because what are we going to want to do? Talk about that a little bit. We're going to try and get Christ involved in here and get the transformation of the overall person. The first type of behavioral treatment is called boredom tapes with masturbation. And basically what they do is that they have the person satiate themselves, and then they have them make actual audio tapes that would normally turn them on. You see what I'm saying? But they don't have a need for it. And so it sort of messes up the whole dynamic of what's going on here, where you normally think about certain things. You know, these things will turn you on, and then you sexually get turned on. Well, they make sure the person can't get sexually turned on, and then they make the person get bored seeing all of these pictures and fantasies and all of that kind of stuff to disassociate the fantasy with the turn-on. Another one, covert sensitization, positive reinforcement. They'll have the person go through the chain in their mind. But see, what do they normally do? When they get to the victim, they get turned on, right? Well, let's continue the story. The police knock on their door, arrest them, take their computer. They spend all these years in jail. See, we have to let them get the consequence. So this thing that they see as positive now becomes negative. See, this is behavior. So we're taking the experience, we're trying to turn all these experiences that normally get them turned on into negative experiences, so it doesn't turn them on anymore, it turns them off. Social skills training. 40 to 50% of pedophiles have poor social skills. We need to have them learn how to meet their needs appropriately and help them to be able to deal with their relationships and develop healthy relationships. As long as they have this vacuum, are we going to succeed? Now, their tendency is going to continue to fill their vacuum through the same means that they always did that. Sexual value training. Sometimes they use tests for myths and sexual information, but we have to get them to see it totally different. What is sex really about? Sex is a wonderful gift for God that is used for procreation and used within a healthy marriage bond as part of the attachment system. And if we can get them to use it that way, then they don't have to use it another way. Another way to look at sexual addiction is simply what the person is doing is trying to meet all of their needs for love and security and all these things through the sexual turn-on. So if we can meet these needs over here, then they don't have to do that. Cognitive restructuring. Removing cognitive distortions about the abuse. Get them to really understand the damage they did to the person. Get them to really understand the effects that all of this stuff has, and get down to the truth of what really happened. Not all the lies, not all the distortions, not that the victim really liked it. There's actually a distortion scale that can be used. Have them practice refuting the presented distortions. In other words, they tell you this is the way it was now. I want you to face yourself and tell me what really happened. And then the debunking the whole thing is to actually sometimes have them carry a card that has the answer. So if my mind goes this way, I can pull the card out and say, see, that's not true. This is what's really true. A lot of this is rational emotive therapy. Now the whole idea where you have the event and what the belief is, we got to change the belief about the event in the particular person. Then finally you go into relapse prevention. Why do we want relapse prevention? Well, we don't want to go back. And if we do, and this person reoffends, we're spending a lot of time in prison, right? But more than that, Do we want them to continue going out and abusing more and more children? Absolutely not. That's our main goal. 66% of relapses occur in the first 90 days in treatment. 71% of all relapses are due to negative emotional states, interpersonal conflict, and social pressure. So we got to head all that stuff off, don't we? Here's some warning signs for relapse. If they're moody, if they have fantasies about their actions, cognitive distortion, they're not seeing it right, passive planning and justification, that means that they're not saying they're planning it, but they are really thinking about how this could happen. If they're masturbating to their fantasies, if they're starting to act out. Now here's something that's sort of negative, but from a secular standpoint, this is what they say. There is no success in totally eradicating all the aberrant fantasies forever. What does that tell you? You might be able to stop the behavior, but many times it's so distorted, it's so deep, and that means that them not going back to their fantasies, start thinking about it again, almost can never be stopped. Abstinence produces a feeling of control which lures into high-risk situations until the coping fails. I've done it. I got it all under control. What's that? The first sign, if you got it all under control, what's this telling you? You're relying on yourself again. When we try to get out of addictions, we have to rely on God, don't we? Start relying on yourself. It means you're about ready to crash, and crash bad. In programs, the first fantasy is considered an initial relapse. If you go back to your fantasizing. So what's the idea? The idea is we don't want to stop them out here because we catch them with a kid. We got to stop them over here so they're not even fantasizing, not even thinking about it. So we don't get all the stuff that's automatically going to lead from here to there. The problem of relapse is a combination of feeling controlled by others, alternate coping responses, expectations about the risk of the behavior, and the ability of the victim. We have all that stuff that we have to take into account. And we have to continually evaluate what's going on here. Now let's talk about this from a Christian perspective. Okay? First, from a Christian perspective, what do we have to realize? People like this go to church. And they have very good facades. And if you don't do a good job and check on who's working with the kids in your church, or who the janitor is, you're setting yourself up for major, major problems. You need to at least be doing a check to see if they're on the list of pedophiles, or if they've been arrested for something, or if they've had any problems before. If you don't check into their background, you're just asking for problems. How can we really help these people? In the same way you help everybody else. They need to get saved. They need to grow spiritually. They need to get delivered. They need to learn the social skills. They learn all these kind of things. But in counseling, what we do is we focus in, try to understand. We try to get all the pieces of the puzzle together because it's fairly complex. I think you'll agree by now of all the stuff I mentioned, all the stuff I'm talking about here. And try to get the person really invested in the treatment to try to recover. If we do have a possible pedophile here, a fixated pedophile, we're going to have some methods like lie detector require some things, or there's a good chance you're going to be deluded and you're not going to be able to really help them. Many times what I will say is, look, you can probably come me. But if you do, it just means you're going to go out and reoffend and end up in prison again. Is that what you really want? You're going to really have to face yourself. You have to get honest. But all the stuff about addictions applies to this. The 12-step program is very good. and can be used in this particular area, in the area of sexual addiction. You're probably going to have to use field foster counseling to deal with the person if they have major abuse and other stuff in their past and work through all of that stuff. But it's sort of a juggling act. You got all this stuff of how you want to help this person over here, and guess what you have to be doing over here? Making sure that they're not reoffending, that they're not hurting somebody else, that you're not just enabling them to continue offending and they're just totally conning you. And that's what makes this counseling some of the hardest counseling there is. And then the third part of this that makes the hardest counseling it is the fact that they usually don't want to be there. This is the way it works. They get their needs met. They seem like they're okay. Many times they're actually suicidal. They're not going to tell you all that kind of stuff. They're really hurting, they're really down, but they're not telling you that. They're keeping up their front because they're afraid if they really confessed and they were really open to you, you would have to report it and they would go back to jail, right? You see the trap that we have. You want to help them over here. You want to keep them from reoffending, and they're not probably going to tell you everything because they're afraid you're going to say something and they're going to end up back in prison. Juggling all that? Give it to God. Do the best you can to help them. But realize that many times the courts are going to get involved and they're going to have to go through that, and you're probably going to lose the client because if the client has really offended, they're going to go to prison and you're not going to see them for a long period of time. How about the families? We talked last time about helping families through this. Of course, this is some of the biggest stuff that there actually is. It's helping the families to recover, to work it through. Remember, we talked about the wounded heart and so on. One of the areas here that is really hard is kids. I've got a client right now. I did have a client because the police just arrested him. 12 years old. They went over to a neighbor and fought with one of their dogs. Not a fixated pedophile at all, but a hurting kid that got out of line. But guess what the possibility is? Might end up in prison. Might end up as an offender on that list for the rest of his life. Sorting all this stuff out. That's why this is the most difficult type of counseling that there is. You need to be careful. Watch out that you cover all your bases. Make sure that you have supervision if you're dealing with this kind of stuff. You're probably better off, if you don't have a lot of experience in this, is referring them to an offender program that's approved by the courts that does have the lie detectors or the other methods to see checking things out. And it has more experience in this area. But is there a need? Huge. So let's put this whole class together. What have we done in this class? We're talking about anger management, domestic violence, and abuse. And this is some of the most hurting, difficult stuff in our whole society. More people probably get hurt through this than anything else that you could possibly imagine. And we've talked about anger. We've talked about two levels. First, dealing with current anger. Remember our slide. And basically, you can help people learn how to deal with their current anger, but there's a whole lot of other anger and buried stuff over here that you have to deal with also. In the area of domestic violence, you need two miracles. You need a miracle with the perpetrator, and then a miracle with the victim for all the anger and all the buried stuff. And we try to, if we can get them to repent and change, and make those changes then to test and to reapproach slowly so we don't have a situation, a reoccurrence in domestic violence. Same situation in sexual abuse. Happens a lot in our society. What do? We want to help both the victim and help them to overcome and not let their life be ruined for the rest of their life due to the defenses and so on involved. And we want to help the perpetrator if we possibly can for two reasons. One, to help them and accept them as a person because they're so put down and the shame level is so great, but also so they don't keep reoffending and damaging more and more people in our society. Huge need. No matter what your situation, if you're here as a pastor, if you're here as a counselor, if you're here as someone who just wants to help in the church, you need to have this information. You need to understand it so that you don't run into situations that are well beyond what you know and what you can do. And you get them the help that they need. And if you're here to be a counselor, you're going to need to learn how to do this and how to work this through and get experience. And get people into support groups and give them the help that they need. Because it's God's will that all be saved. That means become whole and come to a knowledge of the truth. And be set free from all of this junk that the devil uses to destroy people and destroy our societies. And this is some of the more difficult stuff that there is to work with. That's why we're addressing a specific class like we have. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you that you have the answer. In every aspect of our lives, you are the answer. And we ask that you would give us wisdom of dealing with people and give us your wisdom of understanding and seeing past the facades and being past all the things that are going on and help people and strengthen them that they might recover and become all that you want them to be. And we give you all the glory and the honor in Jesus' name. Amen.
Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above him there's no other, 'cause Jesus is the way. Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above him